Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just DAO It, the podcast for people starting DAOs. I'm Adam Miller, and I'm your host. I'm the CEO of MyDAO, which provides legal entity solutions for DAOs. And before starting MyDAO, I did consulting for people starting and operating DAOs. This is the second of two episodes this week. Earlier in the week, we covered recent DAO news with our featured guest, Vikram. And in this episode, we will go deeper into an interview with him. So, Vikram, welcome again to the show.
Adam, thank you. Love the chat we had last time and super excited for today as well. Let's do it.
All right. So to kick off this episode, I will ask you a different introductory question. So Vikram, how did you get into Web3 and DAOs in the first place?
Oops, that's a big one. Okay, let's break it down into two parts. How I got into Web3 and then how I got into DAOs. So Web3 surprisingly happened. I was still in college and I was going through a lot of stuff the way college students do. I was all super stoked about going to Belgium. I had sort of like managed to get a data visualization internship in my second year, which was kind of a big deal back then. I was like, okay, let's go do this. And in the week before I was supposed to fly out, I ended up running into Khan Academy. This course on this thing called Bitcoin. It was popping everywhere, left, right, and center. And I was somebody who's like too much into tech back then. So I was reading all of these newsletters like TechCrunch, one of which must have picked it up. That is how I ran into Bitcoin on Khan Academy and I got started. So I was like, it was a simple, I think, 8-hour long course, one after the other, talking about the real implications and what has happened. But once you start understanding the technology, you really get very curious. So I was like, okay, let me dive deeper. And from there came the genesis of this idea of, okay, this is blockchain. This is so interesting. And for me, back then, my interpretation was like, this is absolutely mind blowing. It has never happened in the world in the past. Though there were examples and experiments being done on the lines of blockchain, even in 1990s, it was my ignorance. And I got started. I was super excited. So much so that I let go of the internship and I decided, okay, I'm just going to stay back at home, probably explore this tech. And a year later, Ethereum came out, right? Like, so you start getting into it, you start reading all these white papers. And back then, I unfortunately was not somebody who could afford to invest in Bitcoin. I remember precisely the price being $197 back then. And I was like, okay, I don't have money. I can't ask my parents for investing here because I don't know whether it's going to go or whether it's like my understanding is broken. But that and the launch of Ethereum and understanding of the basic tech, nothing really changes. If you understand one chain, it's very easy for you to grasp onto what is different in the other one. And you start appreciating a lot of stuff, right? Like, so I started following up. I was still in college, but I was into Twitter. So you would start following up a lot of stuff. I was into Reddit. Reddit was bigger than Twitter back then, as far as crypto goes. And I think from there, the first time where I got my job, my first job right out of university, the first salary I got, I was so sold on the idea of crypto. I was like, okay, it's going to go into crypto. And it happened first time, second time, third time, fourth time. I was like barely surviving, but putting everything that I was making into crypto. And I think in that process, like I was just theoretically good at Bitcoin and Ethereum. But once you have your skin in the game, you will start really being very calculative. So I started playing around with like a whole bunch of tokens. And I think at one point in time, I made the mistake that every newcomer makes of like diversifying to the extent where I was probably holding 70 plus tokens at one point in time. And I was like, okay, it's I don't know, it sounds cool, let's do it, right? Like making all sorts of traditional mistakes that somebody makes when they're ignorant or when they're just like chasing money in a short span of time. And I think the cycle crashed in 2017, but it was that learning where I was like, okay, I was in it because I thought that, okay, I understand the technology and it's going to grow so big that I don't want to be there 10 years later and realize that, oh, shit, I didn't do it or have that regret. The cycle went down. So my craze with investments went down, but there were interesting things happening, right? Like the DAO had collapsed, the first one around Ethereum. Of course, if you knew Ethereum, you were very curious about that. And I was like, okay, let's look at what's happening in the DAO world. Back then, Polygon, I think it was around 2019, it was coming in from India. That is where I had my first job. So you were like, I was running into news here and then I was like, okay, Indian government, so many regulations against it. It's not really going to become a thing. I made quite a few mistakes, got into crypto kitties earlier in 2017 and 2018 beginning. Considered it a joke. At one point in time, I had over 100 of them. I was just playing around. Oh, it's so cool. You're mating one with the other and like, it's fun. And then I let go of all of them. But what essentially happened, you see, 2015 to 2020, I made so many mistakes that when I really got into a professional role at Merkel Science, and that was a choice I wanted to make because I was like, okay, this is the future and I have done enough mistakes. So if I don't do it, I'm probably going to regret not moving into the sector. That I professionally came in, and that is where I realized that, okay, the narrative had suddenly changed. There was this DeFi had picked up. I knew what DeFi was, but the extent to which DeFi had like engrossed the entire Web3 ecosystem, that was surprising for me. I was like, oh my God, there are so many projects being launched left, right, and center. I was not proud of all of them. I was not even happy. I was borderline like scared about what's really going to happen with these many projects. But DAOs were a thing, NFTs were coming up, and like there were so many use cases, right? Like Merkle Science itself was doing good work. So that gave me the confidence that, okay, this is something I definitely want to pursue full time now, right? Like, and at Merkle Science, while I was doing it, I am in the habit of like, so we have this group of friends back from college who always used to hang out. And my co founder today, who's Apurv, he's also a batchmate. So we go back 8 years and we were just like sharing and exchanging a lot of information with each other. I was still at Merkle, and in the process, we started like exploring back this whole idea of e-commerce, right? Like, but e-commerce in the world of crypto. And we realized that, okay, maybe we are going too early into the sector, but in the process, we ended up getting ourselves into certain communities that were very decentralized, or we're probably trying to operate as a decentralized one, right? Like, so it was surprising for us. Okay, it looks weird. Let's see what this is about. But when you go in, you see that, okay, it's a 1,000 member community. Only 10, 20 of the people are really actively collaborating. But those 10, 20, it's very easy for you to go in. So the first few calls were very awkward. It was like, hey, I don't know who I am. Sorry, this is a general team meeting. But I wanted to intro myself. I'm Vikram. And then they would go on and be very welcoming, very heartwarming intro. They'd be like, Vikram, you know what? Everyone has gone through that awkwardness and introduced themselves. So please take the space. We'll pause the meeting for you to introduce yourself. I was like, oh my God, is this how it works? Because we need to definitely fix it. So we're like, okay, it looks like there are tons of opportunity areas in the DAOs. There were a whole bunch of popular, influential peoples, including folks like Cooper Trooper, who were talking about, hey, how DAOs are popping up, and that he had gone full time. So we were getting a little influence. So I decided that, okay, let's park Merkle Science. Let's jump full time into it because we had a decent runway. And we were like, if we do not give it a, like, what will happen in the worst case scenario? We can just give it a try. And we start diving deeper into these DAOs, right? Like, so now we go to these websites, these GitHub pages, because of our tech background. We're like, okay, we need to like check the source code. And we start running into so many weird descriptions. Somebody saying like we have social equity as public utility and all of these vague terms which would not really make sense to us. So we're like, okay, what is even being communicated here? And you would have to like go to the website, go through their code, go through their community chat, show up on community calls, and it would probably be a journey of 6 7 days before you would make sense of what was the community even doing. And on the other side, there were people who were like making millions because there were these bounties that they were taking up. And again, like it was the like that time it was the bull cycle, so there were quite a few bounties. And I think it was there where we decided that, okay, you know what, we are anyway trying to understand what these DAOs are. We are going into them one by one and we are doing a lot of hard work. Why not just put it on a website saying DAOLens? And we just want it to be a lens in the way you look at these DAOs. So you're looking at a magnified view of what is this DAO about? And we don't want to do what average directories are doing. For example, there's no point of me going and repeating whatever is there on the website of the DAO. So let's dumb it down in a way a 5-year-old can understand. 3 questions. What is the DAO? How do you join? And how do you start earning at one? Right? Like, and we were trying to like do all the hard work and put it out on a website. When we did that, we got introduced to the plethora of problems that DAOs had. So the outcome was that we ended up building a tool for discovery where we had like 300 or so DAOs listed with their tokens and social links and some reviews. We had added mechanisms that if Adam is a part of a DAO, can he come and tell me how his experience was so that I, as a newcomer, can decide that, oh, my interest is music. This is a music DAO. Adam seems like somebody who's contributed here and he says it's a good vibe. So let me try it out. That's how we were looking at it. And I think from there was no looking back. We got into so many problems around us that we were like, okay, let's see which one to solve first. I remember making those detailed charts about the entire DAO landscape, that there's this problem of discovery. Once you've discovered something, there's this problem of onboarding, which is to say, how do I get started? Once you have onboarded yourself, there's this problem of like contributing meaningfully. which means that, hey, I really want to be contributing in a way where my reputation grows, where I can learn more things, I can do things I'm not comfortable with. And on the other end, it's like everything is like, hey, how do you do operations? So it was four buckets for us: discovery, onboarding, contribution, and operations. And we were like, okay, you need to solve for all the four because somebody is going to do. There is a traditional organization today, it needs an email to operate, it needs a salary disbursement tool, it has an HR to induce people or like to welcome them on day one, right? Like there is a medical insurance, there is so many things. In a decentralized community where I'm working for five or six of them, where am I going to get those things from? Like, what's going to be my communication channel? What's going to be my way of looking at how much am I earning? What's going to be my way of discovering mentors? What's going to be my way of discovering friends? And so on. So that was how DAO specific efforts started. And that's pretty much an answer to
Wow.
how I got into Web3 and how I got into DAOs.
Wow, that's awesome. An awesome journey you've been on, and pretty early to the DAO space. I got to say, compared to even most of the people I talk to who are working in this space, looks like you were around pretty early, which is really helpful to have people like that we can ask questions to. Um, Tell us a little bit more about a DAOLens. So, what products does DAOLens offer, and what do they do for people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can just talk about it in specific tools and examples that we have done so that it's easier for people to understand. But DAOLens is more of like a suite of tools. So you can think of us if you are a DAO and you have one problem, which is, let's say, around increasing governance or participation in governance efforts that you are doing in your org, or if you have issues around, let's say, payouts to people who are completing bounties, you come to us and we work with you to see whether one of the products that we have works for you or not. And in the scenario where there is not really a massive or like a good fit, we just deploy a team to work with your own internal team to build a suite of tools or a tool that is probably hyper personalized for your use case. So the kind of tools which we have done so far is like one of them has become a massive tool, which was also launched last week. It's called the DAO Manager. And it's so interesting, Adam, like because DAO Manager, essentially what it does is like see how the journey in a DAO goes. It starts from discussions, right? Like, so that discussion is happening in Discord. Now, once you have some alignment on Discord, you go in and say, hey, you know what? There's a forum. Let's float it out there. More people will rally behind it. Now you have a discussion on a discourse forum. From the forum, two things can happen. You realize that, okay, a lot of people are really interested. So you want to float it as a proposal. And that proposal is floated on a tool like Snapshot. Or you decide that, okay, this discussion went nowhere. Let's just sunset it, right? Like now, in the scenario where it became a proposal, there is a voting that happens. And that voting then results into two things again. You either get a grant or you get tasks and bounties if it's accepted. If it's rejected, that's the end of the word. Now, if it's accepted, there is a task and a bounty. Somebody needs to assign that task. Somebody needs to discover that task. Somebody needs to complete and submit. Somebody needs to review. And then let's say Adam completes a task. Adam's supposed to be paid out for the work that you did, right? Like, so that payout happens on another tool. So this task assignment, review, comparison, and everything monitoring happens on a tool like Dwork or Trello. And then payouts happen on standard tools like Gnosis, Coordinate, LlamaPay, and whatnot. And then comes the idea of, okay, I contributed to something. I'm going to get my reputation to increase, right? Like, so that's your reputation piece. Now, all of this in the process, we talked about maybe seven tools, and nobody honestly is working with just one community. Like you're working with two communities. If somebody's using Gnosis Safe and somebody is using Coordinate, you're probably dealing with 14 instances just to like operate in a community where you are passionate about stuff. So we were like, okay, can we really link everything? And that is what DAO Manager does. Everything that you talked about. So that doesn't mean that you don't have to like you can't use Snapshot. If you're like that hellbound on using Snapshot, we integrate in a way that if you write something there, it shows up here, and if you write something here, it shows up there. But essentially it's like a discourse killer for you. There is this forum. That forum discussion can automatically be converted into a task. That task can automatically be converted into a like a grant, or it can automatically be converted into a payout. That payout can automatically result into a reputation, and everything starts feeding in. And the beauty is that you can gate all of it. Now, gating is again like we did a research, I think, for over 2.5 months with over 100 DAO leads, specifically that we were talking to one on one. And the questions were on this front: hey, what are you really doing? What are you really trying to do? And what we realized was that essentially, if I have, let's say, interest in filmmaking and you have interest in filmmaking, or I have a very high credit score and you have a very high credit score, chances are high that the two of us want to hang out together, right? Like, so how do you really facilitate it in a way where the DAO admins don't have to manually go and then do all of these modifications? So comes the idea of gating, where I can gate based on your reputation. I can define rules saying people with reputation scores above 100, only give them the access to this. Or let's say we are talking about a gaming community, right? Like, so the DAO manager piece can be deployed for a creator community, for an NFT community, for a DAO, for a protocol. For example, we are exploring, and it's too early to say, but we're exploring even with Polygon in terms of how their village management can go end to end, right? Like they are coming up with these, they're sunsetting the idea of grants, they're coming up with these idea of vouchers. What can you really do to make it all work? But essentially, the goal is we sit with you to identify these nitty gritties around, hey, you want gating around this, you want people with red hat on their NFTs to hang out together, we can automate it for you, right? Like you want somebody who has the maximum kills to get exclusive discounts, we can do that for you. So that's one massive tool, which is the DAO manager, though we have a lot of other tools. So one of the tools is like about newcomers coming into your community and how do you really onboard them and activate them. So how do you make the journey for a designer different than the journey from a content writer in a way that they can see how their reputation will grow, so that they are not just lurking around in the community but really contributing from day one. One of the tools is about grant management. So that's a grant management protocol. So we are trying to work with Gitcoin and DAOstar and everyone out there as well, which is on the lines of, hey, uh, if you are a reviewer, you are probably reviewing hundreds of grants. If you are a submitter, you have absolutely no guidance in terms of what is accepted as a good grant application. And then even if, let's say, you end up drafting one, how are you really going to have the chances? Like, so these different developers, these different communities, they are launching their own grant programs, and they have some very good ideas. Some of them want to like do milestone based funding, which is to say only if milestone one is hit, amount of grant will be given. But for them to build it from scratch, it becomes very tough. So we are like thinking of, can we make it into a protocol where there are these building blocks that a developer can use and build their own grant platform on top of. So that's another tool. There is one more tool that we did with Aave, which was for newcomers. So you get the idea, right? Like a whole host of tools dealing with discovery, operations, internal community engagement. We have a bot that helps you interact internally and like to get people who are not really active also get active and so on. So that's DAOLens. We are working with, I believe at this point in time, over 120 DAOs in different capacities. Like some of them are just on our onboarding, some of them are trying the contribution engine or the DAO manager that I just talked about. And yeah, that's a not so short summary.
Yeah, it's really exciting. Now that I've learned more, I'm excited to hopefully check it out myself for maybe one of the DAOs I'm thinking about starting. Question for you to dig a little bit deeper into the DAO manager. Does it handle the on-chain creation of smart contracts and on-chain voting and treasury management, or is that more the social layer, but then you do that separately on whatever other tool you want to?
No, yeah. So on-chain voting, absolutely yes. Treasury management as a result of those votes and dispersal of funds. So if like one task is, let's say, submitted, you don't even want people to manually come and review that task, right? Like let's say the task was about publishing a link on Twitter. I can automatically verify it. And as soon as that task is verified as submitted, the funds automatically get disbursed. So that part is also automated and it is done via a smart contract. But creation of smart contract is something which we are still cooking. So that's been planned for like somewhere around the end of February. But we have gotten this request from a lot of people saying, hey, could you really incorporate that? And like what's interesting, Adam, is like, see, we worked with a lot of communities. So one community came and said, you know what, we want to do courses. And as people complete these courses, we want them to go through a quiz. And as they complete these quizzes, we want their NFT to automatically sit on their profile and sort of like be in the form of a soulbound token that can improve with time, right? Like, so now when you're looking at these dynamic NFTs, which are also like sort of going to represent whatever you are doing, the same functionality can pretty much be done by a creator, because a creator is not really trying to create a course, but they're trying to sell a merchandise. So we have designed DAO Manager in a way where it's like these are building blocks. So you can decide that, oh, you know what, I don't need the course tab. I only need the shop tab. And in the shop tab, at the end of the day, it's a merchandise. You can gate it, like who gets access to those merchandise, because some of them may be restricted only for elite people or premium members or classic members. And depending on these roles, you can just like do whatever you want. So there is a discussion forum, there is automatic creation of tasks. The vote here is on chain. Of course, like you can do all of those things, which is emoji based voting in the discussion forum as well. If you just want to like do an off chain sense of it, but everything can be tied down to snapshot, or for that matter, if you are on Solana, we can talk to your own platform, which is Realms, and like get things rolling on that front and so on.
Cool. Awesome. Very exciting. All right. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about your experience working with so many DAOs. And the first question about that is, if you think about all the challenges that are faced by those DAOs, either in their early stages or their later stages, what would you say are the top challenges, one or two challenges that DAOs face, and how do you recommend people address those challenges?
I have a very good answer to that. And this is probably going to save everyone who's listening to this podcast at least 100 interviews, because we hired somebody exclusively at DAOLens to do this research for us in terms of what is the most pressing need for a DAO, right? Like, and we were trying to like just group these answers and like get some signals in it. I think the two challenges, specifically in light of where we are today in the cycle, where everyone is just trying to survive. Most of the communities, they are not even thinking of growing their community. Their goal is like, okay, let's survive through the next 2 years. Let's cut down all the cost. The two most like significant areas for DAOs are treasury management. And what I mean by treasury management is like it could mean two things. It could mean how is the treasury being used and how do you optimize it. So, for example, we talked about grants a while back. Now, let's say you give 10 ETH to somebody to do something, but that person only used 7 ETH. The 3 ETH should ideally come back to your treasury, right? Like, so how do you really inculcate those processes in place so that while you are generous on one end, you are not being misused? On the other end, it's just about also diversification. So, hey, I have like a $1 million worth of tokens in stables. How do I really distribute it? Do I keep it all in stables? Do I distribute a bit of it into ETH? Do I like go in and purchase an NFT? What is really like, do I go in and put it into a yield generator so that I can like get some yield and so on? So that those are the two ways in which we are seeing most of the DAOs tackle treasury management, but that's a very hot area. If you're doing the project in any of these sectors, you're almost more likely to like get attention, or more likely to like 10 times get more attention than somebody who's not working in this area. The second is keeping the community engaged. Now, this engagement doesn't have to be misunderstood with, like random Discord polls and GIFs being shared around and so on. But it's more to do with, hey, we are discussing something on discourse. How can I get the relevant people with the relevant skill to come and share their views? How can we get a guild that we have to share or like talk to another guild? How can we get people who are not really having opinions, but like, so there are these experiments. For example, a part of increasing engagement also is like saying that, hey, instead of saying yes to a proposal, you have to say no to a proposal, right? Like what that means is by default, I'm going to count your no reaction as a yes. And if you really feel strongly against it, go say no. And if 40% of the people say no, or 30% of the people say no, the proposal is going to get quashed. Because again, there are these problems of you waiting for 30 people to vote yes, but then those 30 people probably never saw in the time span the vote was live, right? Like, and the proposal is not moving anywhere. So that is the second area in terms of engagement. So I classify engagement as a lot of things in terms of increasing uh, discussions on forums, increasing discussions around voting, increasing participation in gigs and bounties, and so on. But those are the two primary areas that emerge as the most significant focus points for communities that are decentralized.
Awesome. And what about, aside from those two things, what would be your number one piece of advice for someone who's starting a DAO today?
Yeah, I like if you're starting a DAO today, I think we we end up making mistakes in the form of like decentralizing a DAO in its true sense on day one. And if you're an influencer who's like having 100,000 people following you and like you have some of the best connects with you to like manage it, it's a different story. But for most of the folks, that's not how it works, right? Like they there are a group of friends who just want to start. They've heard of this term DAO, they resonate with it. But when you really start practicing decentralization, when you really start letting that developer from a place somewhere in South Africa come and dictate what your roadmap should be, you will feel a little uncomfortable, right? Like as much as we want to agree to the fact that, oh, decentralization is great, we have grown up in the age of centralized communities. So when decisions are like not being done the way we want them to be done, we will end up feeling a bit uncomfortable. And I think the good start there is just starting with a smaller group of projects. And uh, another big advice is like, I have done this and learned this the hard way, is that if you are a small DAO, just go and then look at the top 5 or 10 DAOs and really think, like, you don't have to copy, but really think why they are doing the things they are doing. Because you as a new DAO, I've seen so many people, so many small communities have really interesting outlooks on what they want their token model to be, how they think their community will grow. But when they really go about applying all of it, it goes nowhere, right? Like it all gets lost. And the reason is because they don't have the bandwidth to experiment. Like if I'm a new DAO, I probably don't have $100,000 sitting in my bank account or my treasury to like afford 10 wrong experiments, right? Like, which is what these big communities with billions and hundreds of millions in their treasury are able to do. So what the mistake I made here, which I want to like be very honest about, was when we started out, we were like, okay, let's build with smaller communities as well, because who said that smaller communities will tomorrow become the bigger ones? And in a traditional Web2 world, everyone says you should not build for just one client because, hey, you will end up building a solution that nobody else needs. And we built something for smaller communities, and we realized that these smaller communities have so less of an understanding themselves that if you base your learning or your concepts just on that, you're more likely to end up with a product that will have to probably be redone or will have to be modified.
Mm.
Instead, if you go work with a community like Nouns, that is really like, they may be doing 10 wrong things as well, but even if they're doing 3 right things and they vouch for it, you are more likely to like hit the right spot in terms of spreading your business or like getting more users and getting tangible feedback goes. So that would be my advice.
That makes a lot of sense. What are maybe a few other DAOs you'd recommend people check out aside from Nouns DAO?
Oh, absolutely. I think like I spend a lot of time in Nouns, particularly because it's become very interesting, and uh, it's also the way the whole ecosystem is being shaping up. I'm also a big fan of how Polygon as a DAO came up, and then they said, "Hey, we're not going to become a DAO anymore." Then they came up with this name called Polygon Village, which was like, okay, we're going to become a village. And then think of it the way there are these tech park villages in the world, right? Like if you've ever been to the West Coast, you know what I'm talking about. And they started conceptualizing it that way. So that was also pretty interesting for me. But otherwise, like there is some phenomenal work being done by folks at this Gitcoin, where they are working on Gitcoin Passport, where you know for sure that this person who's really coming and commenting and voting or doing anything, it's a real human being at the end of the day. And it's one human being. It's not like Vikram can create 5 wallets and do some sort of a Sybil attack and so on, where like I'm influencing the decisions in the wrong way, because those are also very fundamental problems to solve. Then DAOs like Aave and Uniswap, they are, of course, like they have been there for a while, but internally there are so many experiments being done in these communities that it's a brilliant place for anyone who's just this appetite of, hey, let me learn. Because I see these communities being so big that even if you are trying to start out as a small project, you can go to them and say, hey, you know what? I just want to try it out with one pod that you have, right? Like similarly with BitDAO. BitDAO has become so big that there are so many sub DAOs in BitDAO that you can go work with one. And if it works out, great, expand to others. If it didn't work out, BitDAO is also not going to mind. But you don't have to like go in and say that, you know what? Change everything about BitDAO on day one. Like you have to change your narrative in terms of how you are approaching them. Also, super bullish on a couple of ecosystems. Like Optimism is coming up in a phenomenal way. The kind of discussions they are happening inside them. Arbitrum and Hedera, again, like phenomenal work being done there internally, but too early to comment on those fronts. So, yeah.
Hmm. Awesome. Very exciting. So, you see a lot of DAOs and you hear a lot about what's going on in the space. What would you say is the top trend or one of the top trends that you're observing? And I'll suggest, you mentioned in the last episode, impact DAOs were something you've been seeing a lot of, but whether that's the trend or you want to pick another one, what's a big trend you're seeing in DAOs?
No, yeah, I think impact DAOs are popping up left, right, and center. But I want to answer it in two fronts. Like Impact DAO is a category of DAO that's popping up left, right, and center. And there are some very interesting ways in which Impact DAO is being tackled today. For example, there is retroactive funding, right? For example, if you have done some sort of a funding and you have been able to demonstrate impact sorry, if you have been able to like manage a product, manage a project, and you have been able to demonstrate an impact, that is when the funding gets released to you, right? Like, so there are interesting ideas on that front and some very cool, very needed projects that are being brought forward. Otherwise, most of the DAO use cases that had found real PMF were either service DAOs or investment DAOs. And it is high time that we change that, right? Like, so thankfully now for the first time, it's changing in the form of like impact DAOs coming up is like, again, like opening up possibilities for newer things to happen. But in general, the trend that I think I'm seeing everywhere is this discussion about voter apathy and getting people to like participate more and what can be done within a DAO. Like even the smaller DAOs are struggling on that front. And so far, the answer has one word in common, which is delegate. It's about, hey, we want to delegate it in this way. We want to delegate it in that way. The delegate will have this power. The delegate will have the power to quash things, right? Like there are different formats being proposed, but that's again like delegate based voting and delegation, the process of delegation and how you can really like take back the power or revoke so that these delegates can't misuse stuff also is like a massive trend in almost all of these DAOs. In fact, everything that I just talked about for Gitcoin and the passport and so on, all of it ends up getting related to um, the idea of like, participation and delegation. And in general, one of the questions which everybody has, which no one is really actively talking about it, but that's not because it's not an important topic. It's because most of us have a lack of understanding, is the idea of legal stature and taxation, right? Like I put them in one bracket because everyone you go on and talk to and ask them, hey, so what are you thinking? What sort of an org is this going to be? They're like, we don't know. I'm thinking we maybe do an LLC, but is it okay doing an LLC, right? Like there are these questions around, oh, there are 100 people. What's going to happen after 100 people, right? Like, because there are mixed, like, and people are not up to date with what's happening. Like, for example, whatever happened in Marshall Islands, right? Like I went through that a couple of weeks back, that news that came towards the end of the last year, just before Christmas. And I was like, okay, hey, see, there are interesting things happening here, but not everyone is aware of that. And the second thing is you're paying people a bomb, like paying people a lot of money, but then taxation is not really being taken care of. And if you somebody is working full time for DAOs, they're at some point in time going to come back and say, hey, you know what? You are probably liable for my health insurance because you are living in the United States with maybe something, right? Like, so those are again aspects which no one has clarity on. Every DAO has buried this question somewhere deep down in one of the communities or one of the discussions or the pods. So
Yep. Love it. Let's dig a little bit more into delegation before we close the episode. To me, when we talk about delegation, it sounds a lot like representative government, but maybe like liquid representative government, where, if we had something like the parliaments we have in most countries in the world, democratic countries in the world, but you could also revoke your vote at any time. And so you could always have, changing representatives in the government. Is that kind of like what we're talking about when we talk about delegation?
yeah, absolutely. So it's this idea that, hey, not everyone may be an expert on the topic that's being talked about. And for you to be able to cite your opinion just because you are a part of the DAO, just because you are a token holder on something you are not an expert, is not beneficial to anyone. So how about, I don't know anything about legality. I know Adam is an expert. So I go on and say, hey, Adam, I'm going to give my voting power to you. And that voting power doesn't mean necessarily that you have two votes. It can mean that as well. It can sometimes just means that you have the idea of like you can probably do most of the hard work. You can discuss out of the 10 things that the DAO should do, which one should they do? And then I have to get involved again. But the idea is taking back these works, which get slow because a large group of people who do not have expertise are trying to get involved into something, right? Like it's just that. And of course you can take back that power. So it's that, but then on top add nuances in terms of when can you stop somebody, right? Like
Yeah.
how can you reward people and so on.
So like you probably don't give the people you're delegating votes to the power to pay themselves all the money from the treasury, right? So there's
You
certain limitations on what they can do with your vote.
th- there are checks and balances in place. Like if you do
Yeah.
that, the people who are delegating your vote to them, they will take it back, and then there can be punishments. For
Mm.
example, you were a delegate who misbehaved, so you could probably lose your own power as well. And that is what makes it interesting. Like these are experiments that will probably we could answer about which one works or not if we had 100 years of data, but we don't. So we're trying to
Yeah.
figure out as much as we can in a short period of a time.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things about DAOs is not just that they're new, but it takes a while to do experiments because we're talking about actual people collaborating and making decisions together about important subjects, and you can't speed that up. I mean, you could speed it up a little bit, but you can't do it like a computer program and make it run at 100 times a second. You have to let it play out. So we'll have to learn these things over the years to come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been awesome having you on the show, Vikram. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. It has been a pleasure. And I don't know if many of our speakers or listeners here are going to be there at ETH Denver, but we as DAOLens have partnered with a few of our friends to bring this DAO Summit Front, which is DAO Denver. It's going to be a DAO exclusive event where some 150 or so DAO exclusive folks are just going to sit in a room over, like it's happening on 20th of February, right across the hall where ETH Denver is happening. So you can hit me up at any point in time should you have any query. And I think just because the podcast is titled Just DAO It, it would be very relevant for the audience. DAO Denver, it's just like a chapter like DAO NYC, like DAO Tokyo, except that it's happening in Denver and we have some interesting things planned.
So probably another good thing for us to talk about because there's already another DAO Denver that happened last year. Do you know about that?
Yeah, I'm aware of that. I'm aware of
Okay,
that. And
that's also happening again this year. So there may be maybe some discussion about the names of the organizations. But I actually was going to mention that DAO Denver because I also agree people should come to ETH Denver and they should go to the other DAO Denver too. So check out both DAO Denvers, or else stay tuned for if we come up with a way to change the names. But where can people find you and your projects on the web and on social?
I am available at Viksrum, VIKS_RUM everywhere on Telegram, on Twitter. And you can, of course, check my website out at meetvikram.com. That's MEETVIKRAM.com.
Awesome. And you can find me on Twitter at 0xthriller, or MyDAO is at MyDAODS. That's MIDAODS on Twitter, or MyDAO.org. Again, thank you so much, Vikram. It's been great having you on the show.
Thanks, Adam. Likewise.
Yep. Awesome. And are you thinking about starting a DAO? Just DAO it.